today on Online for Authors, I'm chatting with Edward M Rahill, author of 1 Mile at a Time. Welcome, Ed.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor and privilege to be here. I'm very happy.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. Before we really dive into the story, I would like you to tell everyone what it is that they can expect to find when they open the cover of 1 Mile at a Time.
It operates at two different levels. It's a historical memoir based on, it's factual to the extent that I've been able to document just about everything in it. It really starts out with a kind of a memoir of the concept that developed in the 1860s in America for cross-continent horse racing. It started out with this is the one level, and we're going to go to the other one. But that level, I go out of way to try to, it explains why I'm talking about racing later down the road.
Right.
But the Pony Express was invented not as a race, but to get across, North America as fast as it could to deliver the mail. And of course, that whole organization kind of fell apart as soon as the Civil War started. That was 1860 that started, right? But after the Civil War, there was the expansion out to the west, and a new breed of individuals were born. We know them as the cowboys today. And what they were somewhat loners. They owned their own house. Their horse, their car, their saddle, and they would just travel from ranch to ranch to work. And that was, so they were kind of a independent spirit. And what developed in the 1870s is that they would basically start engaging in long distance endurance horse racing. Now, this concept didn't start in Europe, so it's not uniquely American, but it's something that developed here. And they turned out to be about 1,000-mile horse races. And so in the beginning, I explained by featuring a story about the last great American horse race, which occurred in 1893. And it was a 1,000-mile race to Chicago, where, of course, Buffalo Bill Cody had his Wild West show and the World's Fair was going on. He's always been a showman, if you know the history. And he was going to award the winner with a gold-plated .45 Colt pistol, and that did happen. But that really was kind of the last hurrah for the horse cross-continental racing, because the railroads, barbed wire, ranches, property, don't cross my property type of thing changed. And, but that wasn't the end of that spirit, because in 1905, a group of gentlemen in New York City challenged each other to a cross-continental race in automobiles. And we're talking about these open carriage things. We're not
in 1905, the automobiles are nothing like what we know now.
No, they weren't. They were, but it was the beginning, because they were lamenting about the fact that there's no more excitement about long distance racing.
Right.
And the two gentlemen that won did it in 44 days. The second guy came in 48, and it was from New York to Portland. And I have that kind of that documented in the story. And the interesting thing is that in the forward at the beginning of the book, I traveled out to examine the route they took, and I actually got on a wagon road that they took in Portland, and I got lost, and I was a little nervous. I had a rental car, but I came out on a path, and all of a sudden, sitting there next to two of these giant monuments. The state of Oregon had erected a tribute to these two gentlemen as having done the first race ever in North America. And so I have a picture of me sitting, standing there next to it. But when you just think of it, if the state of Oregon did that, think of what the mindset was back then. Adventure, challenge, that was the whole culture. And so what I'm about to tell you is the story of the last great American road race that I participated in. And the little bit of a hint that I get at the beginning, because this really didn't hit me until I stood there in front of that monument. Milford and Little were the first guys ever to win the race. I was the last. And so it was like the alpha omega, the end of and the beginning. And I wanted to capture that as a part of the American culture that existed. And then basically I do some saying how that kind of represented what America was in the late 19th century, 20th century. It was a totally different situation. And when you're going to, what I would just advise the readers, you're going to see some behavior that we undertook as far as how fast you're going and all that. But that represents kind of the end of the culture accepting it.
Right.
And so I wanted to document that. But the under second level is really a story about human beings and people migrating to America and how they built their lives and how we built the country. In many ways, the race is a metaphor for life and a metaphor for how you deal with disappointments and heartbreak and things not going well. And
Right.
so I basically start chronicling my early family, my great grandmother, who came from Ireland in late 1880s at 14 to become a maid on a home in Buffalo, New York, on Delaware Avenue, and that's how she spent her life. And she basically had three or four children, one of which was Anne, which is my grandmother, who ended up raising me. And she was intent upon teaching me things about the past. And the end of the book kind of comes to a crescendo. I try to explain that my view now in life is that we're all participants in life, but it's very much like a relay race in the Olympics. We all have our leg to run, and
Right.
that's the concept. So
I found the book fascinating. I found the idea of the book fascinating for a couple of different reasons. I grew up in a home, my dad loved automobiles.
yep.
He restored in his lifetime, restored
really?
over 50.
Well, I would like to have met him.
Where he would bring in a vehicle and it was an ugly rusted bucket of holes.
Yep.
And when he was done with it, it was a beautiful showcase of an automobile. And he did this with his very first one was a 1932 Model A coupe with the rumble seat,
Wow.
right?
Okay.
And
yep.
then he also did a 54 Jag, and he just did a lot of different cars, and he loved that. He also loved hot rods. He was really into the hot rod idea. The very first car I remember us having when I was a little girl was a Shelby Mustang. So like this was just my dad.
What year?
So I was born in 63. I know he sold it by 69. So it was somewhere in there.
65, 66, 67,
Probably.
68. Why I'm just not interrupt you. I have a 1968 Ford Shelby Mustang GT 500 that I'm picking up at the end of the month. I've been restoring it for 3 years, so I'm listening to your story with fascination.
Well, he loved that car, but when my brother was born in 66, now we have two little kids that are being put into the back seat of that car. My mother finally prevailed and said, we need an actual vehicle for the family. So, but dad was always that. So there's that aspect. And then on the other side is my husband and I rode across the United States on a tandem bicycle from the coast of Oregon to Washington, D.C. Now, we did not do it in any kind of speed. It was not about speed. Yeah. It was about endurance, though, and it was about getting the whole way across. And so you kind of put those two together, and I thought, I'm going to like this book. Like, I'm going to like.
Well, thank you. You're a fascinating person. I'd like to hear more.
So yeah, it was very interesting, that idea of what is it, do you think, compels people to want to do something like go across the United States? Or to see how fast you can do something. Like, not everyone has it. Most people I talk to look at me and say, why in the world would you ever want to ride across the United States on a tandem bicycle? But there are those few who are like, whoa, what a cool thing. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are as to what is that sparks that idea that somehow riding from one coast to the next on any sort of vehicle is interesting.
Well, you probably know the answer to the question because you did it. There's a certain part of you recognize at the moment that there's an adventure in life awaiting you. And for me, in the book, you find out how I grew up around cars.
That's right.
My grandmother who raised me was the first woman to ever own and operate a Ford dealership in the United States. And she's very important to this book. There's quite a bit of story there. I can come back to it, but to answer your question, so I grew up around automobiles in that dealership. She was because lived with her,
right?
And I started out around cars, and at 12 years old, of course, what every boy had to do then, he had to get a job. So I was cutting grass at the dealership, and then it was a June day in 1966. I think it was 11 or 12, and I'm cutting the grass, and a salesman comes out and says, come on in, there's a race on the radar. It turned out to be the 66 24 Hours Le Mans. And I'm listening to it, and I'm listening how everybody's excited about it. And Ford was like dominating Ferrari at the time, which was unheard of in the world. And one driver was 35 laps ahead of everybody, or 35 miles. I can't remember the whole story. It's in the book. And he started slowing down. And I remember saying, why is he doing that? There's something wrong with the car. But I became fascinated with the whole concept of what I learned was endurance racing, because up to now, I'd only been exposed to track racing, which is turn left for 3 hours.
Right.
And those are great athletes. I'm just talking about personality. My personality is going for it, not knowing what's around the corner. I mean, I just enjoyed that concept. And so I started out very early as a lot boy, and I had tremendous opportunities to drive cars. And in the book, I kind of chronicled the experiences I had, including some dangerous ones. But it was in my blood, love of automobiles. And, as we get into the story, I explain how the Cannonball Run had developed over four different races in the 70s, and how I was a college student. I always admired, wish I could do it, but I'm going to get an MBA and all that. But there's an opportunity that arises through a connection. So there was a new race called the 4-Ball Rally, which is the granddaddy of them all. This is from Boston to San Diego, just under 3,200 miles. The Cannonball was 28. So it was an attempt to get the greatest distance out of North America you could. And I ran the race twice, and I talk about the first and the second one. But it became to a point where I had to make a statement for me, because I was at that age where I was physically able to do that kind of racing. Because my grandmother had always preached to me, and the book is just loaded with her. You're going to love her. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah,
she said, basically, if you got a chance, take it, because it's never going to come back. She said, if you have an opportunity. And because I loved cars, I loved endurance racing, I basically just said, I'm going for it. And, for it really became my obsession for about 2 years. And then the interesting thing, which comes from my grandmother about making a difference in life, and the world's a better place to go here. I think I tell it in the book. Here I am. I got the whole story of how we got there. Didn't stand a chance on winning. Last place in Illinois, broken down, and I pull in, and there's nobody there except TV stations and crowds. And it turned out we won by 10 minutes. And then a reporter asked me the question I think that you might be asking. So Ed, you just set a new world's record. You've demonstrated that. Are there any other races perhaps the Baja California, something in Europe? And I remember just staring at her and with a smile and polite. I said, don't remember her name, but I said, I don't want to be remembered for this is the greatest thing I did in my life.
Yeah.
And I graduated from racing at that point. It was a stage in my life. And that came from understanding that life's an adventure. And I graduated into the business world, ended up, executive finance officer, taking a company public, then becoming CEO of a company. And I got the pinnacle there. But, right now, what I'm at, and the book kind of captures this in the back. I hope I don't. But as I've gotten older in life, I now go back to what my grandmother was saying, that life's a relay race. And therefore, I'm starting to shift. I still have a couple of ventures I'm going through that I think they're going to be very impactful on society. But I just remembered it was time for me to start getting ready to pass the baton on.
Yeah.
And the thing that really drove me to write this book and now to market it, and I'm looking to make it into a movie, is because when I sat down to write it, it was really originally a letter to my kids, my 4 kids. And I wrote it because I had reached a point in my life where I don't believe I was the father I should have been, and teaching them what my grandmother was trying to teach me. And of course, being in their late teens, early 20s, dad doesn't have, we got dad's fine.
Right?
So I decided to write it down to a letter. And I asked a friend of mine who's a he's a counselor, and he just looked at me and said, "This is a manuscript." He said, "You got to change your focus on this. This needs to start looking to a novel and a movie." And so that kind of got to my attention, and I realized that maybe I can tell some of the story about prior generations and what America was like in the 20th century to more than just my kids.
Right, right. Well, and I love that because you did capture that. I love how you brought in your grandmother and all of her little tidbits of wisdom, and how at the time that you were learning it, you didn't necessarily really understand what grandma was getting at, but you were taking it in. And then, on your race several times, pieces of your grandmother's wisdom came through to you where it was like, wait a minute, this is what grandma was talking about.
Exactly. I mean, you have to 30 people drove to Boston to start this race, only 11 finished.
Right.
And that there was a lot of reasons, because this was it was exhausting and discouraging. Part of the situation was, and the reason why the race was never run again, this was the nation's first national all points bulletin to every state trooper in the country.
Yeah,
that
they
were
didn't want
coming.
you through. You weren't supposed to make it.
No, they weren't. They had the scripts of their cars. I got arrested in Ohio, and I've got my license registration out the window. So because they want to see your hands back then. And he says, "Hey, Ed, come on back here. How the hell do you know my name?" And he told me, "Here's the APB on you."
Yeah,
And
here you
it
are.
was, but I got arrested twice. We broke down. It was my partner had he was extremely discouraged because we weren't doing as well over the year before. And I had a come to Jesus, if I may use that term, session where I really was 4 miles south of Chicago where I lived. I was ready to turn right and head north.
Might as
And
well
I
go
just
home,
sat there,
right?
and that's when, I don't know if you can, I have some degree of spirituality in me. I do believe in something in that. And it was almost like the memories were coming back of those times when my mom would talk to me about what she went through. And I just remember, finally just shaking my head and saying, screw it. I'm just going to drive this as best I can. I don't care about winning. I just want to finish, and I just want to make sure that I did it. And I said, we're just going to do this 1 mile at a time. And it had 2,000 miles to go. And so that's kind of the foundation where her resiliency that she had and how she tried to instill that in me, I was able to go deep into that lesson. And I'm telling you, it's a hair's breadth that I could have just turned north. I mean,
so, and I understand that in a different way, but we rode 3,102 miles across the United States on a bicycle.
Yep.
There was a point, there was a day, I can tell you the day, I can remember all the feelings. I was done. This was no fun. I'm not having any fun anymore. I see no value in continuing. This is terrible. We're stopping. I'm done. I want to go home now. We were in Montana. We were nowhere close to being done.
Oh.
I was done. I was done.
I get it.
And I found a way. I actually had someone reach out to me and tell me never quit on a bad day. Go ahead and ride a few more days. And if you still feel this way, then you know that you're making the decision with all the facts instead of with the emotions. And as it turned out, the next day was a fabulous day and it changed my outlook. And from that point on, I kept that in the back of my head. We don't quit on a bad day. We don't quit on a bad day.
Well, are you writing a book?
Yeah, I actually wrote one. It's coming out in February. So,
okay.
but yeah, I mean, and it's that idea of you find something deep inside that says to you, you have a little more to give. Why don't you try it?
Yeah.
And it's beyond physical. It's something, and I can't even explain it or where it comes from, but we have a lot more to us than we think we do. And when we come up against something hard, you can stop and just stop, or you can dig real deep and find that extra little piece of whatever it is. And it's amazing what can happen when you go ahead and allow that piece to come out.
I totally in concurrence with you on this. It's the willingness to open up and let yourself go and just kind of let what's your soul kind of get back to you. But it's really strange because
Well, and you said 1 mile at a time. And what we used to say was, we're going to go over this hill one pedal stroke at a time.
There you go.
Well, and it's
the
that
title
idea.
of your book, One Pedal Stroke?
No, it's actually called 10 Little Rules for a Double-Butted Adventure.
Oh,
but
God. Okay.
Yeah, and it's things that I learned while riding across the United States. So yeah, it's that idea. But I loved that. I think while I was reading it so many times, I thought your experience and mine were vastly different. I mean, you were going at speeds at 180 miles an hour, and I was going uphill at 4 miles an hour. I mean, there's huge differences, and yet in a lot of ways, it was the same. It was the same thing. It was that same kind of determination to do something big and bold and adventurous, the kind of thing that most people don't do. Right?
I totally, I have total identification with your story. I think the thing that hit me the most about my grandmother as I reflected in life, she was can I spend a minute talking about,
Yeah,
I'd like people to know about her.
Yeah, absolutely.
She, at 5th grade, she had to leave school to help support the family. And her first job was to walk the South Buffalo Railroad yards to pick up loose coal. And she considered that a good job to sell. And the long and short of it, because this goes back to, I'm going to digress, but one of the things she would say to me is that you need, Mick, you need to break the string of broken dreams in this family's history.
Yeah.
And I didn't quite even understand it. I'm 8, 9, 10 years old. What you're talking about? And the whole thing was an idea, because my great grandmother, was shipped out, never saw her family again. 14. My grandmother went through 36. She got married, had her dream. She married my grandfather, who was an entrepreneur. Went to Detroit, got Ford to talk him into let him start a dealership in Western New York. Got it all started up. She had 4 kids, a stay-at-home mom. He dies of appendicitis at 36 years old.
And her life is over as she knows it.
Oh, no
Right.
income,
Right.
No education, doesn't know the business, 4 kids. And 2 weeks later, Ford sends out their district manager and basically politely informs her that they're going to try to find a new franchisee for the dealership because they need to find a man to run this thing.
Right.
And I won't give away the whole story here, but let's put it this way. At the end of it, I've got a copy of the telegram that the senior vice president at Ford Motors sent my grandmother 18 to 24 months later, and basically congratulating her being the dealer of the year, copying the other dealers in New York. And he said this final thing: what I think we need to start looking at is hiring more single mothers with 4 kids to run these things. So she's showing you how to do it. And what she went through from that desperation,
right,
of not knowing how to make it, and she had tremendous faith. That she always said that kept her in it. But that's what the story she told me. I still, to this day, remember sitting in the family room with her. She's looking out the window, telling me the story. And I was young enough, I knew it was impactful, but I didn't understand it, because I hadn't seen it. And so that's where her attitude about, she used to quote Winston Churchill, victory is not permanent, defeat's not final. It's, willingness to get up and do it again.
Right.
Yeah.
And you did that. And I think that, as you were talking about the race, so we're, now in this final race that you're in, you did a great job describing it, because I felt it. I mean, I definitely was feeling it. And when you wanted to go home, part of me was saying, oh, I understand. And the other part of me is yelling, no, Ed, no, don't go home. You can do this, Ed, there is something. Even there was a point where you were driving and you almost felt like you were like one with the car and the road, and you weren't really even driving anymore. It was all just happening. Like you were just part of everything. And that's an awesome feeling to be able to experience, even if it's just a momentary thing to know that what you are doing right now is exactly in line with what you should be doing right now.
It's Unfortunately, today's world, the average driver is not going to get a chance to experience that because they'll
No,
end up in jail.
no, no.
But if they ever get a chance to take some amateur racing, and I'm not talking track racing, I'm talking about long racing.
Long racing.
You start getting to a point where the car starts it's almost like an extension of your body. Right now our hands are five senses. Well, I got to tell you what, your butt's a sense when you're driving.
Yeah.
The shimmer in your thighs a sense. What's the bump on the back? That's what I mean becoming part of it. Is that the car starts talking to you at high speeds, and it'll tell you when you're getting over the limit. You'll sense it, before you even see it, and then it'll tell you when you can do more. But it takes that experience, and it takes some. You have to. It's almost like looking at a car as if I don't know if you ride horses. You get the same feeling with a horse. Yeah. The horse starts sensing you, and you start sensing the horse.
Right. And you just start to know what you can and cannot do.
Yeah, and you know what the signal that you're getting from that front end is about when it starts shimmering. You know you're getting the airborne guy. You better slow down. Right. And that's the kind of thinking that I think you can only experience if you've been at it a while. Yeah. I think the horse analogy is a very good one because I rode when I was young, and I've had that experience where I could. The horses sensed what I wanted, and I sensed what he was objecting.
Right. And you kind of become one with it. I love that. I'm curious. I mean, cars were obviously something that were very much a part of you growing up, and you just told me a little while ago that you're restoring, so you're still doing cars. Any of your 4 kids at all interested in vehicles, or did that kind of drop away?
That kind of it dropped away, but my oldest daughter is in the motorcycle, so we'll see.
Okay, you never know what might happen there.
People telling me that my youngest son right now is in that Samuel Clemens Mark Twain mode. I don't know if you ever can I just digress and give you a 30 second?
Yeah.
What I mean is this mode. You understand when I finish it. When Mark Twain was 18 years old, he in Hannibal, Missouri, he had just about had it. He'd been reading books. He was trapped here. Everybody's so boring. They don't know anything. So he basically leaves home for 2 years to go around the world. And, his parents were just backward. His dad didn't know anything. And they're just a clerk at a whatever. And they has the whole story of going on the adventure of around the world, from everything from Asia to Europe to South America. And after a few years, he comes back to Hannibal, Missouri. And this is a play I watched. It was Hal Holbrook. Remember that name?
Yeah.
He was playing Mark Twain, and I was watching a Broadway play on it. And I'll just remember, I think I was 12 when I saw it. But when I sit there, he's puffing the cigar. After he gets back to Hannibal, and he says, "I'm coming home for dinner." And he puffs for about 20 seconds. He says, "Damn, you don't know how much that old man learned in the last 2 years."
So I understand that my kids, I've told people before that when my kids were teenagers, I was stupid. And now that they're reaching their 30s, I'm all of a sudden wise. And, I've matured immensely in those years.
Well, I got 4. The youngest one, I think, is still on his trip around the world. Yeah. And so I'm waiting for him to come back. Yeah. But I love them all anyways. The reason why I can't answer your question, because they got their own lives.
Exactly.
But this car is just about done. I put a lot more into the Shelby than I'll ever get out of it. But one of the instructions I gave to this restorer, who really prominent down here in Atlanta, is I want this car to be good as it can be, not what it's not. So you don't turn it into something else. Right. I said second, and I want somebody 50 years from now driving this thing. Right. And I probably shouldn't have said that, because he's replacing screws.
Yeah. Oh, how wonderful, though. You'll love it when you have that. Yeah, you're going to love that when you have it. So, Ed, what is next for you? Anything? I know you want to turn this into a movie. What else do you have coming up in your life? Are you going to do any more books?
I'm getting pressure from different areas. I think I'm at a turning point. What I need to do is carry this book as far as I can. I just make sure that I've given it as much of a ride I can. My goal is basically, to get a screenplay out of it. Right now, I basically have a lot of experience in startup businesses, and I always put a rule in place that I have a budget and a time frame I'm willing to do it. And if I can't get there at that time, you should try to think about moving on. So I have that set for next year, probably the middle of next year. If I haven't gotten it what I want, I won't. But I'm going to put full court press on national publicity on this book.
Yeah.
And I'm going to, I'm looking to hire an appropriate ad agency to do it. The reason why I'm going that route, as opposed to a literary agent, is that I couldn't get anybody to talk to me when I was writing the book.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody.
No,
so I created my
welcome
own.
to the world. Yeah.
Oh, I'm creating my own literary agent, you could say.
Right.
And, I've got a budget. I'm going to go do it because the reason why I'm doing it this way is 2 years ago, I befriended a guy named Brian O'Shea, who is the adopted son of Truman Capote, and he loved the book in a draft form. And he was in Hollywood talking at a party, and he called me up. A couple of producers wanted to come out to Atlanta to talk to you about this. Immediately picked up the phone to a literary attorney and said, "Don't you dare." Says, right now, all they want, Ford versus Ferrari had just come out, a worldwide hit,
Right.
about that. They're looking for the next car movie. And what she said, the only thing you're going to be able to negotiate is the title and your name, because you want to say based on a true story.
Right.
If you write it, publish it, copyright it, and you get sales, you can walk in and say, "I'm selling the rights to the book, not to the idea."
Which is a whole different, right? A whole different concept.
Because I want to capture the second level, which captures lessons learned from life and from generations prior, and our obligation to pass it on. The whole human race. Think about this current generation that's raising kids. The whole human race depends on how well we do that.
Exactly.
One generation, we lose it all.
Right. If we don't pass on what we know, then they won't have anything to pass on to their kids.
You end up with the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, that's exactly.
You end up with the Dark Ages. That's where you go, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say it takes generations to undo that kind of thing. So yeah.
So, but I also wanted to chronicle part of American history.
Yeah.
This was a time when America. I was talking to him. Actually, I was on a podcast that was out of Delhi, India, and he was asking me questions about it. And I said, well, from this story, especially the second level, you're going to discover why America turned in from a bunch of backwater cowboys into the world power and leader it was 100 years later. It was based on the individual.
Yeah.
And I said, each individual came into this country with their dream and their problems, and there was nothing inhibiting them from growing.
Right.
And I wanted to say that if we don't readopt the individualism, that's not being an individual. It's not an excuse not to have social responsibility. But what happens is, and I've seen this country, I've seen Europe go this way. I see America starting as we become more homogeneous or centralized in our society around social government. It now relieves the individual of the responsibility to do anything.
Right.
That family who just lost their house in a fire, I don't have to worry about. Red Cross will take care of it.
Exactly.
100 years ago, you took care of it.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with having something like Red Cross to help, but it does start shifting that responsibility. And so you have to be careful you don't go too far, where then people don't do anything.
Well, what you do, you end up with a bureaucracy that is not close to the people. Right. It's kind of like the old biblical thing. You give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You teach a man to fish, you feed him for life.
Right.
And I think because the whole emphasis, I know when I looked at my grandmother telling stories, the whole emphasis for people in trouble, the community would come around to help them rebuild the ability to take care of themselves.
Exactly.
It wasn't about, here's your food stamps. I mean, it wasn't that at all.
No, it was, let's get these people back on their feet so that they can now be productive again. It's a whole different thing. And so if someone wanted to get up with you, talk to you more, learn more, get up with you because they want to turn this into a movie, how is it that they reach you?
Well, I have a webpage, which is edwardrahill.com.
Okay, and I'll have that in the show notes.
Sold on Amazon, and you can get a Barnes and Noble. I'm going to give you your answer. And basically, I think I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram author@edwardrahill.com. And if you can send an email to ed@edwardrahill.com, I'll get the email.
Fantastic.
Does that make sense?
I'll have all that in the show notes. So definitely, guys, this is one of those books that you don't really have to know cars to love this book. I think that it really helps kind of define that spirit of adventure. So if you have any of that in you or just feel the need, and then I love how you brought your grandmother and all of her wisdom into it and how that just kind of played out the whole way across. So definitely, guys, run right out and grab the book. And Ed, thank you for being with us today.
Let us know when your book is up.
I will. I absolutely will. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.